Tim Robinson is joined us this afternoon. He's a founder and chairman of DigiRail. And he's going to look, I think, at where we are, what we can learn from other sectors, particularly the retail sector, and what railway could learn to catch up. So for the next 20 minutes, please make sure your phones are on silent. We'll come back and do Q&A afterwards. But now over to Tim.
Thank you very much. So my name's Tim Robinson, founder and chairman of DigiRail. I still class myself as a railway guy, although I've been out of the sector for 8 or 9 years now. I was in the early team at GB Rail Freight, so in the founding team at GB Rail Freight. I spent many years in that business. I spent a few years as a route managing director at Network Rail, so I've worked in infrastructure too, and various other roles. But back in 2014, I sort of took the plunge and left the rail sector to found a business called Doddle, which is a retail logistics technology platform. So kind of still in and around the world of logistics that I'd come to understand over 20 years in rail, but ultimately looking at it from a very different angle. And the idea for Doddle came about at a time when the retail sector was going through like unprecedented levels of disruption. So the 2008-2009 financial crisis had caused property costs to spiral. So all of the traditional retailers, the omni-channel retailers, department stores, kind of high street fashion retailers, were finding that their kind of core operating costs were increasing significantly. But at the same time, they were coming under huge pressure from the pure play online retailers that were starting to take market share and starting to kind of change the way in which the supply chain operated. But it wasn't a period of time where there was shortage of demand. Retail was seeing more and more spend per customer. The retail sector was seeing kind of more and more activity. But it was very hard to find a retailer and to find business in the supply chain that were making any money. It was an extremely curious but scary time. It had become clear that under the pressure of all of these new pure play online retailers, it was very expensive, very difficult, and very, very kind of time consuming to reshape these very old school supply chains that were ultimately feeding these much more traditional retailers. And kind of the likes of Amazon, ASOS, Boohoo, coming along, offering free returns, free delivery, fast delivery, giving the consumer the expectation that this is all free. Of course, it's not free, it's extremely expensive. And both from not just a cash perspective, but from a kind of operational complexity perspective, this is a hard commitment to give. And the traditional retail and logistics supply chain was struggling to keep up. But of course, this is, say, 2010. Amazon aren't a new entrant in 2010. They're already, by this point, the 4th largest retailer in the US, and they're taking market share from the traditional retailers like it's going out of fashion. But they're seemingly doing it without any of the growing pains that are being experienced by the more sort of mature organizations. And as these kind of more mature businesses started to change their supply chains and ultimately try and take advantage of digital, some of the tools that Amazon were put into play in the field, their operations just started to creak under the pressure. They just couldn't keep up, couldn't evolve, couldn't interact, couldn't kind of keep up with the pace. And I think sort of here in the UK, the Christmas of 2014 was pivotal. So it was the first year where we had what I'll kind of describe as an e-commerce Christmas, where the majority of presence online, the majority of spend was online rather than in more traditional environment. And this was a Christmas where the pain of growth, the pain of keeping up with this new model really became quite stark. And it wasn't just retailers. In the week before Christmas 2014, one of the largest movers of parcels here in the UK went bust. They went bust at a point where they had more revenue and more volume than they'd ever had. So they had more demand than they'd ever had, but they just couldn't keep up with the pace, they couldn't keep up with the demands of the consumer, and they ultimately couldn't get their unit costs right to be able to handle that volume. And a number of the delivery businesses that still exist today, the brands that you'll recognise, one in particular, Yodel, collapsed into a very spectacular operational heap. in the weeks leading up to Christmas 2014, and they left something like 13 million items undelivered in the week before Christmas to their customers. And I don't know if you remember it, but it was literally front page news. The guy that ran Yodel at the time, a lovely guy called Dick Stead, was on the news at 10. He's on the news at news at 9. He's having to kind of justify it. And of course, what's the word that keeps coming up when these guys are being pilloried by their long-term customer base? One word: Amazon, 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 Amazon. They're blaming Amazon, blaming Amazon, blaming Amazon. But of course, right at this point, Amazon are delighting all of their customers. They're delighting all of us. But the more traditional supply chain was ultimately blaming. And of course, by then, some of the historic retailers, Debenhams, House of Fraser, the Arcadia Group, they were in real trouble by then. It was very clear that those business models were not going to be able to survive and endure. And so it had to, the retail supply chain had to endure, and a lot of the I guess the headlines were on the big brands. It was on Debenhams collapsing, Mike Ashley taking House of Fraser. That's where all the kind of headlines came from. But the thing that shouldn't be underestimated is the impact over a 10-year period that the change the rest of the supply chain has had to go through in retail logistics, retail manufacturing, supply, procurement. Everything has had to follow suit, and the pain for more traditional retailers is that they had to follow the predators. They had to be led by the likes of Amazon and eBay and Rakuten, these sort of very digital businesses, and had to ultimately copy their business models. Now now if you go to back in 2007, Amazon opened a 400,000 square foot warehouse just on the edge of Milton Keynes. The traditional sector literally couldn't get their head around it. It had more SKUs, more items in it than you could possibly imagine. They stocked pretty much everything in this place. They were fulfilling same day out of that facility to places in the Midlands. There was people absolutely everywhere. Like, it was a huge employer. Broadly at this point, the more traditional kind of logistics supply chain had come to the conclusion that you couldn't run efficient operations with people. You had to take people out of the mix. And in doing so, you had to you had to rethink the kind of the commitments you would give to your customers. Amazon went completely counter, enabled all of these people with digital applications, with the right sort of training, fully integrated warehouse fulfillment, dispatch systems. If I was on, getting paid £11 an hour at this place in Milton Keynes, on my handheld, I could tell why I was scanning this item. I'd be able to see who it was going to, when they expected it, what bay it was going to leave from, what vehicle it's likely to go on. I basically gave every bit of information, enabled everything, and the thing worked absolutely perfectly from day one. And that facility is now twice the size it was in the day it was opened. It's been double the size, and it now serves most of the south of England. They haven't put a single robot in that building. So this isn't big ticket digitalisation. This is digitising the details. It's digitising the things that make the difference ultimately. If you now go to the John Lewis warehouse at Milton Keynes, 10 minutes down the road, it looks exactly the same. So, they've had no choice but to ultimately copy the predator. They've had to take what was being successful in that environment and rinse and repeat ultimately. And so this for retail was the proverbial burning platform. Things had to change, and if it didn't change, you could see very quickly that your business, your brand, your supply chain, your role in supply chain was ultimately going to come to an end. But the thing I'd say that the retail sector kind of worked out just in time was the new pure play online retailers. They weren't just redefining how consumers shopped. And that, I think, is the headlines were, they're redefining how consumers shop. This is the big ticket item. Amazon have redefined how business is conducted in that sector. It's about one click. It's about different payment options. It's about filtering on websites so consumers get the best experience. But ultimately, it's about conducting business up and down the supply chain. And if you want to work for Amazon, and I've had the fortune of being able to do that over the last 8 years, you have to interact digitally. There are no manual interactions, no manual transactions. No one ever sends an email. If I send an email to Amazon, something's gone very badly wrong. Everything has to be digitized and integrated, and it has to flow as part of your natural way of life, your natural way of doing business. You know, whilst it's kind of they're kind of digital everything philosophy ultimately, and whilst it's taken time for the broader retail sector to adopt all of that, you know, it kind of, to compete and survive, it has happened. And some what were very traditional businesses are now ultra digital in the way they operate. And I'd class John Lewis in that category. I don't know if any of you have shopped with John Lewis recently. They went for a bit of a patch, I'd say 2018, 2019, 2020. Stuff was out of stock, couldn't get access to things, but actually now it's a very slick operation. The customer experience is very good. You know, but with Amazon, they in their formative years, this wasn't perfect, you know, so this didn't happen overnight. They were well known from day one for having a slick front end, Amazon.com, the website, you know, and that's where they were able to pioneer some of the elements of e-commerce that we're all used to today. But behind the scenes, it was chaos. I don't know if you've read any of the books or seen any of the documentaries. The first 10, 15 years of Amazon is absolute chaos. Logistics, stocking, warehousing, manufacturing, purchasing, merchandising, absolutely all over the place. And it was predominantly chaos because at the front end, they created this great, slick digital experience and therefore created expectations amongst the users and consumers, but nothing in the back end was digitized. I have a fear, which is why I'm here. I have a fear that we might be in quite a similar place here in rail, because we're about to make some relatively large-scale, big-ticket front-end digital transformations led by the Network Rails and the HS2s and all of these huge businesses that sit at the top of the tree. I'm not sure the rest of us are ready to consume all the data and all the expectations and all of the modernization that's going to come out of ERTMS into train control systems, you know, into demand planning and execution without digitizing our own environment. So I'll come on to that again in a minute. But there's a couple of things around how you move your mindset, you know, into kind of digital everything. You know, a couple of kind of principles that play out. The consumer has to be the main focus. And, you know, our consumer, it could be, you know, we manufacture parts and the consumer is an engineer in a maintenance facility. We've got to think about how that individual, how that guy or girl is going to consume my part. How are they going to make that order? You know, how are they going to see stock? How are they going to know what they've got? How are they going to plan their work? Think about what they've got, the tools they've got. It's not all about the passenger wanting to get on the 1212 from Derby down to London. There's millions of us, thousands of us in the sector that need to be digitally enabled before the passenger, you know, long before the passenger, to give the passenger what they really need in the long run. And so I'd say in the kind of the commerce supply chain, the consumer is at the forefront of everybody's thoughts. You know, and therefore there's no room for protectionism. So in here, as an example, there's going to be lots of businesses that all sell to the same people. They're selling different parts for different parts of the supply chain, different parts of manufacturing, maintenance, whatever it happens to be. A good example would be in Doddle, my day-to-day business, we power a particular part of Amazon's returns process. So if you ever want to do a return with Amazon, you go through a returns page, that's all on my environment. It looks like Amazon, but we host all of that. And in doing so, we generate a lot of insight and a lot of data, you know, about the consumer, why the consumer's returning the item. You know, we know through our own data pool how many times that item's been returned today, what were the reason codes, is it the same reason codes, all these sort of issues. 10 years ago, I would have been telling people this is why my business is going to be worth millions and millions of pounds, because I've got all this data and it's great insight and I'm going to be able to sell that insight. You know, and that's where the world of digitization and technology was 10 years ago. Now, I'm not allowed to do any of that because the mothership, Amazon at the top of the tree, they insist that I pass all of that information throughout their supply chain. So I have to have integrations with different suppliers that do different things, because if I find out that, you know, this jacket in a 42 long is consistently being returned for this particular reason, I have to send that information to the manufacturer of the jacket or the merchant who's on the platform. I don't get to control that, keep it, and I don't send it back to Amazon in a report for someone in Amazon to then go and tell the person down there. I have to send it straight to them. You know, and that I suspect in our sector there's still quite a bit of protectionism around data and information, even though we might not be the people that can fix it. I might not be able to fix the problem with I'm going to betray I've been in railways for 25 years, but I'm going to betray my knowledge about what any of this stuff is. But, you know, this component down here, like, they might supply it, But actually the issue that's causing the problem is these guys over here. You have to send the information straight to them. I can't be protective around that issue. And that's a core principle that now lives throughout the entire, not just Amazon, the entire retail supply chain. We share data. And because everything is digital and everything is automated, there is a very low tolerance for failure. So, and here's the thing that I found really difficult to get my head around originally, because I launched Doddle out of Network Rail. So I was a route managing director at Network Rail, and the reality is I was used to reports. I got more reports than you could shake a stick at every day about all sorts of different things. I was very fortunate to land Amazon as one of the first customers for Doddle here in the UK, and immediately became clear, you don't do reports. Like, because you have access to every single bit of data, they just expect you to know what's going wrong. So when you go to meetings, then no one sits down with a report and a thing and a KPIs. KPIs don't exist, that's not a thing. They go right into the thing that's going wrong. And if you don't know what's going wrong, then you're not using the information they give you and the access they give you to all of these important tools. And so again, it's like a very big philosophical shift from, I think, where analog, non-digitally enabled supply chains are to where they could be, in order to speed up the whole thing about how we fix things, how we do things differently, how we get things right. And I hate to admit it, on more than one occasion, I've had my platform frozen, once by Amazon, once by Rakuten, and that's pretty painful because they literally shut you off, you know. And the reality is, unless you fix the issue, you don't get switched back on again, and they have fail-safe solutions and all those sorts of things. It's a pretty scary place to be, and so it drives you to fix it immediately, not read through the report, send it down to the performance team who might have a look and come up with a performance plan of how you fix it. It forces you in to actually fix the problem. But here's the one that I think is interesting, and I think is a we have a huge opportunity in rail now, because we're going through a period of transformation to get on top of this stuff. But Paul Harwood was here earlier on. Paul and I are old colleagues. You know, he's talking about the GBR transition team, and I got sent some stuff the other day about the proposed shape of the new exec team and head office in GBR when it goes live. And one thing stood out to me. There is a directorate for digital. There's the first problem, because what they're now seeing is digital is a department. It's a project. And it's somebody's going to be accountable for digital. How can one person or one team be accountable for digital? But there is an analogy, I think, that sits very well alongside here, which is, I remember not long ago, safety was a department. Safety was a department. We worked together. Safety was a department. And actually, people often looked at Carl. We had a very big operating business with lots of crazy stuff going on at times. Everybody expected Carl to keep us safe. That was lunacy, absolute lunacy. And through good cultural shift in rail, I think Mark Kahn, who was my boss for about 20 minutes actually, but in that 20 minutes, it became very clear that he wasn't going to take the fact that safety was a department, safety was everybody's responsibility, and became like the kind of the core running through the culture at Network Rail. If this is going to work for us going forward, digital has to be everybody's responsibility, and it has to run through the core of the culture that exists in every business, regardless of what size or scale. And it can be done, because regardless of what level of work you do, wherever you sit in the supply chain, there's lots of very, very small specialist businesses in rail that serve possession sites or engineering works. There might be 3 or 4 people working in those organisations. They have the same safety culture now that the big guys would have, and have to be able to play a part. It's a table stakes, it's a table stakes. But I feel like we could be facing our own e-commerce shaped burning platform right now. Neil showed earlier on, passenger numbers down. It will come back. When I look at some of those numbers, I live in Sussex. I commute on one of the busiest railways in Europe. There's no way it's at 70%, I tell you for a fact. So we might be reporting 70% passenger numbers back compared to where we were in 2019. It's not on the Brighton Main Line, and that's a pretty busy route, because I'm getting trains at 8 and I'm getting a seat. And I could pick a seat. So I think we've got a long way to go to understand, how passenger numbers are gonna kind of reappear. We've got government under I think there is one now. I just read on my phone earlier on. We do have a government again, 20 minutes later. But they're under once in a lifetime fiscal pressure. We're not going to be treated specially, I suspect, in rail anymore. So all those years we've had of year-on-year funding growth, year-on-year volume growth, activity growth, it's not going to happen anymore. It's going to be different. We're going for a new era. And so therefore, but I think burning platforms drive transformation. You know, if you think about railways, the big transformations we've had over the years, it's often been on the back of burning platforms. It might be safety issues. It might have been privatisation. You know, if you think about over the last 30 years, it's predominantly been privatisation and horrific safety issues. And therefore this could be the thing that triggers the change. But the thing I'd say is it's about, if we as an industry believe digital is something that Network Rail or GBR have to lead, and it's all about big ticket projects, we're already doomed. It's about all of these businesses in here, ours included, having to ultimately commit to digitalisation as a core part of our culture going forward. The days in history when it said, oh, well, our workforce is too old, they're too set in their ways. There's not a person in this country that doesn't have a smartphone, that doesn't use the internet, that doesn't look at Netflix, that doesn't do online banking. The world's changed. We're all ready for it now. I think for me, it's about getting on with it, making it a part of everything we do, our everyday, and taking comfort that there are businesses like John Lewis, there are businesses like, Flannels, there are very old school businesses that are now very digital and serving their customers in the most modern way. So I think we have it in us. It's a cultural thing, it's not a project, was the main message. Thank you.
Neil, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A very interesting insight into something. I never did understand the Amazon philosophy. I remember a few years ago I bought a folding tea trolley, complete with free delivery, and paid £3.50 for it. So I think they paid me about £1.50 to take it off their hands, and I never did quite understand that model.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Yeah, sort of build scale, buy scale. Yeah.
So anyway, interesting insight into how some of the digital leaders are working and what we can learn. Do we have any questions from the audience? We do.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carl Watts, Rail Operations Group. Thanks, Tim. Absolutely super talk. One of the things that makes me nervous about the rail industry is how fragmented it is. And to embed a new digital era in a fragmented industry is going to be a challenge. How do we get around this fragmented industry, and how do we roll out digitisation across several thousand companies?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think it isn't as dissimilar to other digitally enabled supply chains as you'd think. In terms of, there are some similarities between the retail supply chain and rail. They're both global. So you've got international providers providing providing key services to businesses in the UK. But there are lots of relatively small specialists doing relatively narrow things in that regard. For me, I think it becomes about that phrase table stakes. So, and the one thing Amazon have done, and I don't want to bang on about them all the time, but it's very difficult not to in my world, but it's an absolute table stake. If you want to be part of their supply chain, you have to commit to systems integration. So you don't have to use their system, their applications. If you think about rail, there's millions of different software applications out there that are all pretty good. They're all going to be good because smart people have put their own time, money, love and commitment and effort into building them. The trick is integrating those systems so that they can work together and talk together. And that's a bit of the, I didn't want to do a pitch for DigiRail, but that was the reason for launching DigiRail a couple of years ago, because whilst still on the board at GB Rail Freight, I went out to the market to try and find a third party to help us look at what we bought in terms of digital applications and work out, can we get them talking to each other? Because they were still like islands, little packages of stuff doing little things. And we found a couple of things. We were spending £1 million on, don't mention this to John, I'm doing this very publicly. We were spending £1 million on software that we no longer used a year in license fees. Literally no one was ever logging into, and we're spending about another £1 million on software that we used to about 10% of its capability, where most of the functionality was never touched, but we did this one little bit with it. And that most businesses will be in a similar state, whether it's the same numbers or whatever, the challenge is still the same. But I think the only way you do it is if, in your world, and I think you're going to find this, when you start to work for Amazon, which you will soon, they're going to expect you and your supply chain to have digitally integrated systems. And you might think it's none of their business, but they're going to want to know that your planning system is reliable, that it is integrated into your back office systems, that it provides them all the information they need. And if you don't have it, you won't get the work. And I think that's the way it works. I think it needs, and if I look at Network Rail going into the future, these 5 units, for them, I think they have to be the arbiter. I think they have to insist on their supply chain becoming more digitally integrated and more digitally active. That might give you a bit of time, but I think it's got to be part of the contractual framework. This is what we expect you to get to,
So basically you're saying, Tim, is all your discussion about Amazon is the top of the pyramid, as GBR will be top of the pyramid. The challenge is for Amazon suppliers to be digital, and therefore for GBR's suppliers to be digital.
Yeah, and it takes time. This can't be GBR's responsibility, but they have to set the standard. They have to set the tone. Like God knows how many people they're going to have in the head office here in Derby, almost certainly, I'm sure. But they're not going to have enough. They're not going to be able to get into the detail of all these businesses' systems, how they plan, how they exchange orders. I imagine lots of, and it won't be everybody, but I imagine in this room there are lots of businesses that still take orders via email. Emails get stuck in outboxes, and you can't get connections, you can't get Wi-Fi, and all that stuff. I mean, that's critical stuff. So GBR aren't going to be able to get into that, but they've got to find a way of being clear that this is the expectation for our supply chain going forward. We expect it might take X period of time, but if they don't set the scene, then it will never, if the top of the food chain doesn't set the scene, it will never happen. My worry is the more they create a department, they think digital is all about massive projects. And I've been to workshops, I've been invited to things, which has been great, but you got, KPMG and PwC and Ernst & Young and all these people, they want big projects, they're after big ticket stuff. And that doesn't change, that doesn't transform, that prolongs, it delays transformation because everyone thinks they're on it. Anyway, that's a rant, sorry. Yeah.
Hello, Sam
Hi.
Richardson from Petard's Rail Group. We do a lot of CCTV. We're recording a lot of video on a lot of trains.
Yeah.
We really want to find a way in which we can use that data, still data, in lots of different things. But I think there are still quite significant hurdles to overcome, like GDPR and people's protecting people's identities, etc.
Yeah.
Do you see it as being part of that overall strategy to involve video?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think that is a classic example of I think we've talked about it before. There's all this data flowing around, coming out of cab-facing cameras or out of other different monitoring equipment. The danger is it ends up being owned in a little pool over here, and you never get it out there. It never gets out into the system. And in the end, it will be impossible to ever create a case for having 25 of you guys running 25 teams, 25 projects, 25 backends. Ultimately, it's about that kind of open-minded, open philosophy around nobody owns this data. Now, there has to be a way of licensing and that sort of stuff. That happens in the Amazon supply chain. If you've created something, you get licensed, you pay for it, you get paid for it somewhere. But I think fighting those things, though, that's the detail. Getting into the detail of why you can't share that information and why you can't give it to Network Rail or why you can't give it to, a business that manages vegetation on the Suffolk line. It's getting into those little things that will make a difference. They're the things that will make a difference in digitisation. Because every day, innovation happens every day. Every day, one little stumbling block gets dealt with, another little stumbling block gets dealt with, another little stumbling block gets dealt with. And we always talk about, why did you launch DigiRail? What are you going to do with DigiRail? How big's the business going to be? My thing is it's a lot of small projects. This is not multi-million-pound projects. I think we could be kept busy with 10 grand projects, doing the little things, making those differences. So keep fighting, because I think it's businesses like yours with that sort of technology, with the amazing insight that nobody's consuming. Got to find a way of getting them to consume it. And integration, that's the key. Clever integrators.
Okay. Oh, I'd say Rob would be the other side of the other room. So it's all the little projects that actually make up the big project.
Yeah, pretty much. It's where the oxygen is. You know, the big projects are important, but the oxygen comes from day-to-day digitisation of previously analog tasks or analog things.
Thank you. Thank you for a brilliant presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I'm Robert Hopkin from the University of Birmingham Centre of Excellence, it says, in digital services. Just a quick one. My previous life was in the Royal Air Force. We had something called LITS, which was the logistical information something system. Unfortunately, it didn't work because nobody understood the purpose of it. We called it lost in time and space because, and as part of that, the transformation. Sorry, the T stood for logistical information transformation system. Part of the thing that it introduced was 16 priority codes. Now, I work on I'm a simple person, so it's either urgent or it isn't, or it's really urgent, and therefore, I'd just be interested to know how Amazon work on prioritization. If they have 16 codes, God bless them. Yeah. And is there anything that you can learn from other sectors, in particular maybe defence, because we're starting to get it much better now. Yeah. Right kit, right place, right time, right condition.
No, I think that's right. So I think the second point first. I would say learning from other sectors is essential, and there's only so many kind of synergies with retail, supply chain, and rail, because I think. Rail, we have manufacturing, we have big projects, we have a lot of different characteristics where actually maybe defence, for example, infrastructure, anything infrastructure-led, there's a lot to learn from those sectors, I'd say. In terms of businesses like Amazon and how they prioritise, at a very simple level, everything's urgent. And so, and what they try and create is uniformity. Everything goes through exactly the same process at exactly the same point in its journey. So it's very rare that any particular product or order would go through any level of prioritization because they offer the same commitment to everybody. The slight difference is in those markets where Prime is actually faster than standard delivery. So they will prioritize Prime orders and they will pick run those in slightly different ways. But when it comes to things like returns, for example, they apply the same kind of approach to a your £3.50 trolley that's damaged as they would to a Gucci handbag that one of the merchants was selling. They apply the same flows. What the rules engine does, moreover, is that one thing they do is they prioritise customers, not SKUs. So you will get a different returns offer than I will. So if you noticed, if you ever return anything on Amazon, sometimes I have to pay, sometimes I don't have to pay. That's because the engine is working out the value of the item, you as a customer, what's the lifetime value of you as a customer, how frequently have you returned. They might give you different returns options. They'll push you down different routes, drop it into a post office if it's X, keep hold of it, give it back to the driver if it's a Y. So it's more, they prioritise at the doorstep rather than in the back-end system. And that uniformity is the thing. Put everything through the same process.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Are we out of questions? In which case, just as easy to say, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for attending this icon. And thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you. Cheers for that.